everyone. My name's Kaysen, and joining me today on our podcast will be Vivek, Abby, Marty, and Jake, and we're the XYZ men. Today we'll be talking about amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, which in general is a progressive neurodegenerative disease and its disruption of homeostasis of the nervous and muscular system, meaning that it causes the degeneration of motor neurons grouped in the brain and spinal cord. This process is called apoptosis, leading to the paralysis in muscles. Up next, we'll be discussing more on homeostasis is Jake.
Thank you, Kaysen.
Welcome, Jake.
So, in my opinion, this disease is very unique. While the upper motor neurons are being destroyed and there is no clear damage on the brain and spinal cord, the symptoms typically occur on the lower part of the body, the limbs. The primary symptoms are tripping and falling, loss of control in hands and arms, difficulties in speaking, swallowing, and breathing, persistent fatigue, and last but not least, twitchings and crampings. As a pharmacy student, we will discuss deeply about how its mechanism works. So based on what Kaysen said, ALS affects the motor neurons. So what is the motor neuron? This is the brain cell located in the spinal cord in the brain and connect the muscle, organs, and glands in our body. The upper motor neurons in the central nervous system release the nerve impulse transmitted to the lower motor neurons to reach the final target, which is a skeletal muscle. A nerve impulse is also called a neurotransmitter that releases electrical signals to make the contractions and stress on muscle fibers. So without motor neurons, the muscle is unable to extend or contract because there is no control signals received from the brain. This is called the paralysis and then lead to the state atrophy, which is defined as the muscle reduce in size and become weaker. So Martin will talk about the effect of ALS on the nervous system.
All right, so I'm going to go over the two types of motor neurons here. We've got the bulbar motor neuron and the somatic motor neuron. And each one plays an important role at controlling the specific parts of the muscular system. The bulbar is referred to as the medulla oblongata, the lowest part of the brainstem under the pons. The medulla is responsible for the regulation of cardiovascular and respiratory functions. It also controls reflexive movements like coughing, swallowing, sneezing, and vomiting. These actions are all activated by the bulbar motor neurons. Our data showed that 1/3 of the ALS cases come from the bulbar, including difficulties in chewing, speaking, and swallowing because of the tongue wasting and jaw stiffness. Bulbar onset also causes the paralysis on facial muscle, which creates the inability to express emotional liability, which is crying or laughing excessively due to the minor emotional stimuli. Most of these cases start from the limbs. When upper motor neurons are being destroyed slowly, there will be difficulties in standing and walking, as well as other movements like grabbing, raising limbs, and so on. These actions are controlled by the somatic motor neurons. Lately, patient is unable to lift arms against the gravity or has an unstable posture due to the weakness in the scapula and back muscles. So next, we are going to have Abby talk about demographics of people who are diagnosed with ALS.
All right, thank you, Marty. That's pretty intense, pretty scary stuff right there. And although it's really sad that all that happens, it's seemingly random who it affects. And the demographics that we're comparing are the US and Europe. And in the US, there's about 5,000 new cases in the last year in the US and 16,000 in total. In Europe, there's about 1,028 reported incidents of last year, which is pretty crazy. And while we do think it's random, there have been some similarities between patients. There have been more cases of Caucasian males than any other demographic getting ALS, and the likelihood of being diagnosed drastically increases after the age of 45. And the top 3 countries that have cases of ALS includes the EU in first place, China in second place, and the US in third place. And another reason why it seems random is that although it happens in developed countries and in aging populations, Japan, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to be as affected as the US and other countries, which is shown by there's a 10% increase in cases of ALS in Japan, while there's a 34% increase in cases in the US. So that's pretty interesting, and we're going to be talking about a US patient pretty soon with Marty, and he will be going over pop culture and the history of ALS.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the history of ALS here. It was first recorded in 1869 by French neurologist Jean Martin Charcot, but it was made famous by a famous baseball player by the name of Lou Gehrig, which ALS is more commonly referred to as Lou Gehrig's disease. Some other famous people who have been diagnosed with ALS include Stephen Hawking, and he impressively lived with ALS for 55 years, and we are going to have Vivek elaborate on that a little bit more. Vivek?
Thank you, Marty. Yeah, I actually really want to bring up the Stephen Hawking incident because it's actually quite an interesting topic. What do you guys say? First of all, he actually got ALS when he was 21, which is quite interesting and weird considering most people get around 40 to 50. And like Marty said, he had it for 55 years. He actually just died last year at the age of 76, which is quite interesting. So I wanted to ask you guys maybe how he's able to live this long. Do you guys think it's his financial status or some other factor towards this? Because I have read that there's 2 main factors behind ALS. One of them is just genetics, and the other one is environmental triggers. So does anyone else have any word to say about this? Marty?
Yeah, so the 2 factors that you talked about were environmental triggers and genetics. So, I mean, Stephen Hawking, he probably had both of those play a role in him living for as long as he did, for 55 years, as well as I don't know if we mentioned it earlier, but his disease, or his motor neuron disease, was a slowly progressive disease, which probably got worse and worse. Abby, do you want to elaborate on the Stephen Hawking and it's slowly progressing?
Yes, thank you. So I read an article that quotes Dr. Jeffrey Elliott, who is the chief of neuromuscular disorders at the University of Texas, which is very credentials. And he says that his survival is longer than most, and he thinks that in part, a part of his longevity may have been because he had the slowly progressive form, and it may have also been because of the exclusive nursing and medical care that he received. We will...
Sorry, I have the people waiting for them.
And we will get back to Vivek talking about the possible medical treatments for ALS.
Awesome. Thank you, Abby. Yeah, so treatment-wise, there are a few drugs out there that have shown to help with ALS by slightly reducing motor neuron damage. While it's not permanent, it does, again, slow it down, and drugs like Rulatech can help this.
Some other treatment drugs that I personally, while working at CVS, have seen that we call in the pharmacy, they called fast movers, and these drugs are ones that aim to target other specific symptoms of ALS. muscle relaxants such as baclofen or diazepam. Treat things such as spasms, cramping, controlling pain, and other medications that I see pushed out. Another one that's common is called amitriptyline, the generic brand, but the brand name for it would be Elavil, I think is how it's pronounced. And what that could be used for is for people treated with ALS, pooling of saliva in their mouth due to difficulty swallowing, take this medication to help them, retain food, liquids, such things like that. But other medications, can be required to treat stuff like constipation or depression, other things that come along with having such a terrible disease like ALS, So, yeah, that's all I have there.
So I agree with your ideas, but instead of focusing on the symptoms, like we should, the scientists should focus more on the genetics, because I think ALS is a genetic disease. Compare the number between two articles in 2011 and 2017. Like we have found that there are 120 genes that associate with ALS disease.
It's very interesting.
Well, thank you, Kason, for having us, and until next time, I guess. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. Good night, folks.